still too broke to buy a decent dress. The sound of my brother's voice dipped in champagne and cutting sarcasm was the only thing capable of silencing a ballroom of Savannah's elite. My brother's voice sliced through the chatter like a lash of cold air. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but sharp enough to leave a lingering sting. Every guest at the reception table turned toward me, his older sister standing there in a plain navy gown holding a glass of water I suddenly couldn't swallow. Ethan loved to perform, especially when the audience was full of people he wanted to impress. Tonight, that audience was everyone who mattered in Savannah's social circle. And me, the one he'd always called his family's embarrassment, was his opening act. I smiled the way you do when you've practiced not to flinch. "Guess I spent it all on plane tickets to your wedding," I said softly. The guest chuckled politely, unsure whose side to take. Ethan's bride Marissa looped her arm through his, whispering something that made him grin wider. "We're just teasing," she said. "You know Ethan. He's so proud you came even with your busy translation job." That pause, the delicate, poisonous pause, the same one she used last Thanksgiving when she asked if I'd finally found something steady. I forced a smile again and murmured, "Yes," still translating before moving to the bar. The music was low and elegant, the kind played to remind you you're not part of the elite. Around me, women in silvery gowns glided between tables while waiters offered champagne on trays that gleamed like mirrors. I could see my reflection neat bun soft makeup, a dress I'd bought off the rack in D.C. last week. Not cheap, not couture, just enough to disappear. But disappearing had been my specialty for years. At the corner table, I spotted my mother radiant in emerald satin, her laughter too bright to be real. She'd always said Ethan had the spark and I had the patience. In our house, patience was the polite word for invisibility. Tonight she looked at me the way she looked at the servers. Polite, grateful, but detached. "Clara, darling," she called when I approached her. Southern drawl polished with pride. "Isn't it wonderful our Ethan is marrying into such a distinguished family? Marissa's father owns the hotel chain. They'll be in every paper tomorrow." I smiled. "Yes, Mother. They already are." Her hand fluttered to my arm. "And you're still with, what's it called? The translation agency?" "Something like that," I said. Before she could reply, the MC's voice filled the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses to the groom and his beautiful bride." Everyone stood. Glasses clinked, laughter swelled. I stood too, the dutiful sister, my smile steady, while Ethan took the microphone. He loved microphones. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he said, voice confident, charming, especially my sister who flew all the way from Washington. She's always been the quiet one, but I know she's proud of me, even if she's still living that frugal, minimalist lifestyle of hers. Laughter again. The good kind for him. The pity for me. I felt my jaw tighten. Somewhere near the entrance, a group of men in dark suits entered, quietly, official badges glinting under the chandeliers. I recognized the crest immediately. U.S. Diplomatic Corps. My pulse steadied. They weren't here for Ethan. They were here for me. I kept my face neutral, sipping water, as if nothing had changed. Ethan went on, oblivious, bragging about his new business expansion. "We're hoping to land international partners soon. Maybe even government contracts. Guess big dreams pay off, huh?" Marissa giggled beside him. "You've always been ambitious, babe." He grinned at her. Unlike my sister, who thinks success means working from a cubicle and drinking instant coffee. That got a real laugh. I set my glass down gently. "Excuse me?" I said, smiling, as I stepped away from the table. The nearest exit led toward the lobby. One of the suited men spotted me immediately and approached with a respectful nod. "Ms. Caldwell," he said quietly, "Ambassador Rivera asked us to escort you. The delegation from the Trade Council has arrived." I nodded once. "Thank you. I'll be right there." As I turned, I caught my reflection in the ballroom mirror again. The plain navy gown, the modest jewelry, the sister who didn't belong. For a moment, I almost pitied Ethan, how small his world was. Back inside, the guests clapped as he raised another toast. "To new beginnings," he said, smiling proudly. I slipped through the glass doors into the corridor, where the hum of diplomatic conversation replaced wedding laughter. The ambassador was waiting, an older man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone used to respect. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Ah, Madam Caldwell," he said warmly, extending his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. We've heard about your policy work from the State Department. Impressive." "Thank you, Ambassador," I replied, shaking his hand. Behind him, one of his aides added, "Your analysis on the Kenya Development Report was invaluable. The delegation specifically requested your guidance." Through the open doors, I heard Ethan's voice booming, still holding court. "My sister." "Oh, she's just a translator. Nothing fancy." I smiled faintly. "Shall we begin, Ambassador?" He nodded. "Of course, Madam Caldwell." The title hung in the air like a quiet thunder, a single word that would have stopped the entire ballroom if anyone inside had heard it. As we walked toward the adjoining hall, I glanced once over my shoulder. The reception lights glimmered through the glass, and somewhere inside, Ethan was still talking, unaware that the world he thought he owned was about to tilt. He'd asked if I was still too broke. Soon he'd find out what wealth really looked like and what dignity sounded like when spoken aloud. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself a real smile. The ambassador's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed, yet his tone toward me was nothing but respect. "They've prepared the documents in the conference room, Madam Caldwell," he said, holding the door for me. The marble hallway gleamed beneath the chandeliers, a stark contrast to the sugary chaos of the wedding reception only a few steps away. I caught my reflection again in the mirrored wall, the same navy gown Ethan had mocked. Somehow, under this lighting, it looked almost regal. Inside a table was set with leather portfolios and nameplates. The officials rose when I entered. "Madam Caldwell," one of them greeted, "we appreciate your attendance on such short notice." "Of course," I replied calmly. "Trade initiatives wait for no one, not even a wedding." That earned a polite chuckle. I took my seat beside Ambassador Rivera, scanning the agenda East African Infrastructure Development Program, the one I'd been quietly building for 6 months under a non-disclosure directive, the one Ethan's company had been desperately trying to approach without realizing I was on the other side of the table. We began reviewing final adjustments. I spoke clearly, my voice measured, confident. "We've confirmed the U.S. contribution matches the Kenyan delegation's proposal. The funding will be released once the sustainability criteria are certified." The ambassador nodded approvingly. "Your precision, madam, is why this project exists." Outside the door, laughter burst again from the reception hall. For a moment, I imagined Ethan's face when he eventually learned that his sister's little translation job was the reason his potential investors were even in Savannah tonight. One of the aides leaned closer. "Should we delay the signing until tomorrow?" "No," I said. "Tonight, before rumors start flying." "Very well." The ambassador signed first, then passed me the pen. I signed beneath his flowing signature, "Clara Caldwell, Senior Economic Liaison, U.S. Trade Council." By the time we stepped out, the wedding band had begun playing "Can't Help Falling in Love." The timing was poetic. "Would you like to greet your family before we leave?" Madam the ambassador asked kindly. I hesitated. Just for a moment. We entered the ballroom together. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The room fell quiet save for the distant hum of the violin. Ethan stood near the dance floor, champagne glass in hand, mid-laugh. When he saw us, me walking beside the ambassador, his smile faltered. "Ah, there you are," Ambassador Rivera said warmly, oblivious to the tension. "Your sister has been instrumental in structuring our entire development framework." "My..." Sister Ethan's tone wavered. "Yes," Rivera said. "Ms. Caldwell, your Clara, she's been my top liaison for international negotiations. Extraordinary work." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marissa blinked, visibly struggling to connect the dots. "Clara?" "You never said," I smiled gently. "You never asked." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Wait, you're saying she's what, some kind of government consultant?" The ambassador chuckled softly. "She's being modest. Without her, there would be no agreement." People began whispering. Someone raised a phone. Marissa's father, the hotel magnate, stepped closer. "You work with the U.S. Trade Council?" "Yes," I said, "and with several international partners." The ambassador beamed. "We've just concluded tonight's signing. It will be public by morning." Ethan's face was drained of color. "Here tonight?" "Yes," I said evenly. "The delegation wanted to finalize while in Savannah. They preferred discretion." Marissa's mother pressed a manicured hand to her chest. "My goodness, how fascinating." The ambassador checked his watch. "We must return to the hotel for a follow-up call. Ms. Caldwell, you'll join us, of course?" As he turned to leave, he paused. "You should be proud of her," he told Ethan. "She represents your country with exceptional grace." When the doors closed behind us, the murmurs erupted into a low roar. I caught a glimpse of Marissa's parents. Her father pulled a phone from his pocket not to gossip but to search my name, his eyes already shifting from shock to calculation. Marissa's mother, initially horrified, quickly adjusted her smile, scanning the room as if trying to gauge who else knew my secret. The panic was morphing into opportunity. In the hallway, the ambassador slowed his pace. "You handled that beautifully, madam. Calm dignity is the rarest weapon." "Years of practice," I said. He smiled knowingly. "Family often teaches us restraint." By the time I returned to my hotel suite that night, social media was already buzzing. Someone had posted a photo of me beside the ambassador captioned, "Local translator attends high-level signing." The comments were predictably wrong but enthusiastic. I didn't correct them. I never did. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. An email from the State Department blinked in my inbox. Subject: "Congratulations, Madam Caldwell. The ambassador's recommendation for promotion has been approved." I read it twice. Senior Director, Global Liaison Division. Twice Ethan's salary, triple his title. I stared out the window at the harbor lights flickering across the dark water. For years, I'd chosen silence. It had been safer that way, to let people think I was smaller than I was. But silence had never meant surrender. It meant patience, calculation. My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. What the hell was that? "Why didn't you tell me you worked with ambassadors?" I typed back slowly. "You never asked. And tonight wasn't about me." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. I set the phone down, exhaled, and glanced at the clock. Midnight. Outside, fireworks burst above the harbor in celebration of the wedding. From my suite, they looked like distant sparks over black water, beautiful but fleeting. I thought of Ethan's words earlier. Still too broke, and smiled to myself. Broke was what people said when they couldn't measure your worth any other way. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the silence fill the room. Somewhere down the street, the music from the ballroom carried faintly through the night. I raised my glass toward the window, as if toasting the city itself. "To be patient," I whispered, because patience, I had learned, was the quietest form of power. The morning after the wedding, I woke to sunlight cutting through the hotel curtains and the faint sound of gulls outside the harbor. My phone had been vibrating all morning, missed calls, unread texts, voicemails labeled Mom and Ethan. I ignored them all. I sat on the edge of the bed, the ambassador's bracelet still around my wrist, and let the silence remind me how good peace could feel when no one expected you to apologize for it. The first message was from my mother. "Clara, call me immediately. What did you do at the reception? Everyone's talking about it. Your brother is furious." The next one was shorter. "You embarrassed us." I scrolled down to Ethan's. "You made me look stupid in front of my investors. You knew they were there, didn't you?" I took a long breath, set the phone face down, and opened the curtains. The harbor glittered calm and endless. The world hadn't ended. My brother's pride had. By noon, I decided to visit my mother's house before the gossip reached her bridge club. She lived in the same brick colonial we grew up in, the one that smelled of magnolia candles and old resentments. The front door was unlocked. "Clara," she called from the kitchen the moment I stepped in. "I just finished watching that awful video. Do you realize what people are saying?" I set my purse on the counter. "Probably that I work for the government and my brother didn't know." She turned still in her robe, holding a cup of coffee like a weapon. You should have told him. Do you know how arrogant that made him look? Arrogant wasn't my doing, Mother. She sighed, her tone softening, but only slightly. You could have prevented this. You know how Ethan gets about appearances. I leaned against the counter. Yes, he gets cruel. Her eyes narrowed. Don't start. Your brother's accomplished, Clara. He's the face of this family. You've always been independent. Is that what we're calling it now? I asked quietly. When I got the State Department offer, you told me it sounded unstable. When I bought my first condo, you said I was wasting money because I wasn't married. When Ethan bought a sports car on credit, you called it a milestone. She frowned. That's not fair. Neither was last night. For a long moment, she said nothing. The clock ticked on the wall, the same one that had measured every silent dinner when we were kids. Finally, she said, he was just trying to impress people. You know how men are. Yes, I said. And I know how women are expected to forgive them for it. She winced but didn't argue. I picked up my purse. You always told me silence was graceful. I think it's time you realized silence can also be powerful. As I turned to leave, her voice softened. You think you're better than him now? I stopped in the doorway. No, Mother. I just stopped being less. The drive back to the hotel was quiet except for the hum of the engine and my thoughts replaying old memories. Ethan in his cap and gown smirking when my college scholarship came from a fancy school that teaches you to talk. My mother reminded me that men built legacies and women supported them. I'd believed her once. When I reached the hotel, the doorman handed me a message. Mr. Chin stopped by earlier, he said. Said he needed to talk to you. Did he leave a number? He's in the cafe downstairs. I found Ethan sitting by the window. Ty loosened a half-empty espresso in front of him. His face was drawn, not angry, just tired. You wanted to talk, I said, taking the seat across from him. He didn't look up right away. I've had a rough morning. Everyone saw that video, Clara. The one where the ambassador called you Madam Caldwell. Do you know how that made me look? Yes, I said. Like a man who underestimated his sister. He flinched. You think this is funny? No, I said evenly. I think it's overdue. He leaned forward, his voice low. You could have told me. You could have warned me. Instead, you let me mock me, I interrupted. In front of 200 people. You're right. I let you. Because sometimes people only see what they want to when they think they're the star of the room. His eyes flicked up, uncertain. So what now? You think you're some kind of hero? No, I said quietly. I think I'm free. He stared at me, searching for something he could argue with. When he found nothing, he laughed bitterly. You always had that holier-than-thou calm. Makes people crazy, you know that. I smiled faintly. Yes, I learned it from watching you lose yours. He stood suddenly, tossing a few bills onto the table. Fine, you win. Enjoy being the mysterious government genius or whatever you are. Ethan, I said softly as he turned away. You don't have to lose for me to win. He paused but didn't look back. Tell that to the people who watched me last night. When he left, the chair across from me felt heavier than before. The waiter approached with the check, hesitating. Are you the Madam Caldwell from the signing last night? I met his gaze, then nodded once. I suppose I am. He grinned. Everyone in town's talking about it. My mom said it's nice to see a local woman show up all those big shots. I smiled genuine this time. Tell your mom she's right. Back in my room, I opened my laptop to a dozen emails, news requests, congratulatory notes, an invitation to speak at a women's leadership panel. The irony wasn't lost on me. Last week, I couldn't get my family to listen. Now strangers wanted to quote me. I clicked delete on half of them, replying only to one. Ambassador Rivera. Thank you for the kind words. I'll continue as liaison through the implementation phase. Let's make sure this partnership lasts longer than the applause. CC. Outside Savannah buzzed with gossip. Inside, the air felt still. I thought about what my mother had said, that Ethan was the face of the family. Maybe that was true. But faces fade. What lasts is what's built underneath the structure, the substance, the quiet endurance no one sees until it's too late. I looked at my reflection in the window, the bracelet gleaming on my wrist. The family that forgot to listen, I murmured. They'll remember now. Then I closed the curtains, silencing the city, and let the quiet claim me again. The sound of the rain against the window woke me before dawn. Savannah rain always carried memory with it, heavy, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I lay still, watching the streaks race each other down the glass, wondering how many storms had passed since I last felt this quiet inside. Silence had been my companion for years, but now it felt different. It wasn't a defense anymore. It was clear. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from the State Department Ambassador Rivera requests your presence in D.C. next week for the post-signing briefing. Travel arrangements attached. I exhaled slowly. Work didn't stop just because family drama had gone viral. If anything, it accelerated. I showered, dressed, and ordered breakfast downstairs, ignoring the curious looks from the staff. By now, half the hotel probably knew who I was. That was the price of exposure recognition where anonymity once lived. The cafe was almost empty save for a few guests and the morning news flickering across a muted TV. I caught my name in the ticker at the bottom. Local diplomat stuns wedding guests with ambassador appearance. A reporter's smile froze on screen beside a grainy screenshot of me shaking Rivera's hand. My coffee turned cold before I touched it. Is that you? The voice came from across the room. A woman in her late 50s floral dress, polite curiosity in her tone. You're the Caldwell girl, right? The one everyone's talking about. I smiled politely. I suppose that's me. She nodded approvingly. Well, good for you. About time someone in this town showed those high society snobs that brains count for more than diamonds. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I expected. When she left, I sat for a while longer watching the rain blur the city outside. There was satisfaction in what had happened, yes, but also something heavier, the understanding that I'd broken an illusion my family had lived in for decades. By mid-afternoon, I drove to the old Caldwell estate. My parents had bought the land before I was born, 5 acres of oak trees in silence. The driveway was lined with puddles and the air smelled like wet soil and ghosts. Ethan's car was parked out front. I almost turned around. Instead, I parked behind him and stepped out into the drizzle. Inside the house was dim quiet, except for the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. Ethan's voice came from the living room. You finally showed up. He was standing by the fireplace, sleeves rolled, a glass of whiskey in hand. The look he gave me wasn't anger this time, just exhaustion. Mom told me you were coming. I didn't say I was, I replied. I needed to collect some old papers, that's all. He laughed without humor. You always were practical. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence between us. Then he said, You know, everyone at the wedding keeps asking about you, about your job, about how I didn't know. I look like an idiot. You don't look like an idiot, I said calmly. You acted like one. He stiffened. You could have told me. You could have asked. Ethan stared into his glass. Look, I'm not here to apologize again. That's pointless. But my company is trying to pivot. We're looking at international financing, government-backed grants. You're in that world now. Is there a way for us to connect? Maybe I could bid on something your department is overseeing. I set my purse down gently. You came here to ask for a favor, Ethan. A professional courtesy. He looked away. I'm asking my sister for help, yes. And what did you call me 2 nights ago? Too broke, too frugal, too quiet to matter. I was an ass. I admit it. But this is business, Clara. This is real money, real growth. Growth based on what, Ethan? Your confidence or my credibility? I let the question hang. You never think it matters until it costs you something. And the truth is, I can't risk my work, my integrity in a partnership with someone who still measures worth by the price of a dress. That kind of risk is too expensive. He stood suddenly, his face pale. So you're shutting me out. You'd rather see me fail than share the success. No, Ethan. I'm choosing my success over your entitlement. You don't have to lose for me to win, but you absolutely have to listen for you to succeed." He stared at me, searching for something he could argue with. When he found nothing, he laughed bitterly. "You always had that holier-than-thou calm." "Makes people crazy, you know that." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I learned it from watching you lose yours." He tossed a few bills onto the table. "Fine. You win. Enjoy being the mysterious government genius or whatever you are." "Ethan," I said softly as he turned away, "you don't have to lose for me to win." He paused but didn't look back. "Tell that to the people who watched me last night." When he left, the chair across from me felt heavier than before. The waiter approached with the check, hesitating. "Are you the Madam Caldwell from the signing last night?" I met his gaze, then nodded once. "I suppose I am." He grinned. "Everyone in town's talking about it. My mom said it's nice to see a local woman show up with all those big shots." I smiled, genuine this time. "Tell your mom she's right." Back in my room, I opened my laptop to a dozen emails, news requests, congratulatory notes, an invitation to speak at a women's leadership panel. The irony wasn't lost on me. Last week, I couldn't get my family to listen. Now strangers wanted to quote me. I clicked delete on half of them, replying only to one, Ambassador Rivera. "Thank you for the kind words. I'll continue as liaison through the implementation phase. Let's make sure this partnership lasts longer than the applause. CC." Outside, Savannah buzzed with gossip. Inside, the air felt still. I thought about what my mother had said, that Ethan was the face of the family. Maybe that was true, but faces fade. What lasts is what's built underneath the structure, the substance, the quiet endurance no one sees until it's too late. I looked at my reflection in the window, the bracelet gleaming on my wrist. "The family that forgot to listen," I murmured. "They'll remember now." Then I closed the curtain, silencing the city, and let the quiet claim me again. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning while I was still packing for Washington. My flight was in 4 hours. The subject line read, "Formal invitation, Caldwell Family Foundation Gala." I almost laughed. A foundation, my brother's newest vanity project. I hadn't spoken to him or my mother since the rain-soaked confrontation at the house, and now they wanted me back, dressed up, smiling, pretending the wedding debacle had never happened. The irony almost burned through the screen. Scrolling down, I found my name listed among the guests of honor. Dr. and Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, sponsors. Ms. Clara Caldwell, Senior Director, Global Liaison Division, United States Trade Council. The description below made my stomach twist. Honoring those who inspire the Caldwell legacy of leadership and integrity. Integrity. The word tasted bitter. I closed the laptop and finished folding my clothes. I should have deleted it. Ignored it the way I'd ignored every attempt from Ethan's PR team to clean up his image. But something in me hesitated. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Or maybe the satisfaction of knowing that the sister they had humiliated was now the one whose name carried weight. When I landed in D.C., Ambassador Rivera was waiting with his usual calm authority. "Madam Caldwell," he greeted, shaking my hand, "we'll need you for the trade briefing tomorrow. But tonight, I understand you have family matters." "You've heard," I said. He smiled faintly. "The internet hears everything. Just remember, diplomacy begins at home." That evening, as I stood in front of the hotel mirror, adjusting the neckline of my black satin gown, I wondered which version of myself I would bring to the gala, the silent sister or the woman the ambassador called Madam. The Caldwell Family Foundation event was being held at the same hotel where Ethan's wedding reception had taken place. Same chandeliers, same glimmering skyline, different hierarchy. This time the atmosphere wasn't sugary chaos. It was calculated elegance. The guests, largely Washington and Savannah social elite, greeted me before they greeted him. "Ms. Caldwell." "Such a pleasure," one man said, shaking my hand. "Your work with the Trade Council is remarkable. The East African Initiative is visionary." "Thank you," I replied. "We're only getting started." Ethan approached midway through the cocktail hour, his expression carefully neutral. He looked polished, new tuxedo, steady smile, but his eyes flickered with unease. Clara, he said, offering a glass of champagne. I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted, accepting the glass but not drinking. He hesitated. I know things got out of hand at the wedding. This gala is important for the family. For the foundation. The family, I repeated. Or your reputation, he sighed. Does it matter? It does, I said. Because one can be rebuilt. The other requires honesty. Before he could respond, a photographer called his name. He excused himself quickly, leaving me with the faint scent of his cologne and the sound of whispered speculation nearby. My mother appeared moments later, shimmering in a gold dress. Darling, she said, her kiss missing my cheek. You look stunning. We've had 3 senators ask about your D.C. office already. I'm just doing my job. Mother, I said, keeping the conversation brief. The emotional entanglement I'd feared was gone, replaced by a cold professional detachment. Halfway through the cocktail hour, I was pulled into a conversation with a senior aide to the Secretary of State, discussing the Geneva summit. She listened intently to my analysis on currency stabilization, her gaze confirming that my opinion held significant weight, something Ethan could never buy. Halfway through dinner, a familiar face appeared across the ballroom. Rivera. The ambassador had arrived unexpectedly, surrounded by aides. He caught my eye and smiled. Ethan saw it too. He froze mid-sentence during his speech. We're honored to welcome Ambassador Rivera tonight, he announced, trying to sound composed. He's a valued partner in many of the international projects our family supports. Rivera inclined his head graciously, then glanced toward me. The honor is mine, he said. I simply came to congratulate Ms. Caldwell. Her leadership in defining ethical investment for the Trade Council inspired several of our global collaborations, setting a new standard for U.S. economic policy. The room shifted, subtle but palpable. Murmurs exchanged glances. My mother's hand tightened on her wine glass. Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Rivera continued. It's rare to find someone who carries both intellect and humility so gracefully. Your city is lucky to call her its own. Applause broke out. I stood acknowledging it with a nod, the same calm expression I'd worn through every diplomatic negotiation. Inside, my pulse steadied. Ethan recovered quickly, raising his glass. To my sister, he said, forcing warmth into his tone, for making our family proud. It sounded rehearsed. After dinner, Rivera found me near the terrace. I hope my presence didn't cause disruption, he said. Not at all, I replied. Just clarity. He smiled. Clarity can be dangerous in certain families. I know, I said, but necessary. As he left, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered across the water, mirroring the stars above. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, my family's endless performance. Ethan joined me a few minutes later, his voice low. You invited him, didn't you? I turned to face him. No. He came because my work matters. He looked away. I can't compete with that. I never asked you to. The silence between us stretched. Finally, he said, You make people feel small, Clara. I shook my head. No, Ethan. I make them see how small they've been acting. He didn't respond. When he walked back inside, I stayed where I was, staring at the skyline. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the axis, the still point, everything else spun around. As the clock struck 11, I turned to leave. A young waiter near the door stopped me. Ms. Caldwell, he said shyly. That ambassador called you madam again in his speech. What does that mean? I smiled. It means I earned it. He nodded, grinning. Well, you wear it better than anyone. Thank you, I said, walking away. Outside, the night air smelled of jasmine and change. Somewhere behind me, the laughter grew louder, brighter, more desperate. But I no longer needed to belong to that noise. For the first time in years, I felt light. The invitation had brought me back, but not for reconciliation, for revelation. And standing there under the city lights, I finally understood sometimes the loudest revenge is grace spoken softly in a room full of people who once silenced you. The next morning, I woke to a message marked urgent from the Trade Council. The subject line read, Confidential Caldwell Foundation Inquiry. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside were attached documents, financial statements, project lists, and one very familiar signature. Ethan's. Apparently his foundation had been funneling donor money into his private company under the guise of infrastructure consulting. And the new project he'd been bragging about, the one tied to my trade work, wasn't a coincidence. He'd tried to piggyback off my diplomatic contracts without approval. I scrolled through the pages, my hands cold. Every memo, every transfer bore his name. And if this reached the press, it wouldn't just be his reputation, it would hit the entire trade council. My work. My name. I sat at the desk for a long time watching the city below the hotel window, the cars threading through morning traffic like tiny restless thoughts. I had spent my whole life cleaning up after my family's messes, apologies, disguised as diplomacy tolerance, disguised as grace. But this time was different. This time his choices touched the world I'd built on my own. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was calculated greed, a threat to the integrity I had fought for. The temptation to quietly alert him, to give him an hour to clean it up, the old habit of protecting the family name, surged and then broke. I gripped the edge of the desk, the polished wood cool beneath my fingers. It wasn't just Ethan I was prosecuting. It was the entire system of entitlement that had suffocated me for years. To remain silent now would be to validate every sneer, every dismissal I had ever endured. The pain of betraying my brother was real, but the pain of betraying myself was far greater. I called the number listed on the report. "This is Caldwell," I said. "I want the full file delivered to my office in D.C. by tonight. No leaks, no discussions." "Yes, madam," the analyst replied. When I hung up, I felt the familiar sting of betrayal give way to something sharper, resolve. Ethan had crossed the line between arrogance and recklessness, and I wasn't going to protect him anymore. By noon, I was back in Washington. Rivera met me at the council offices, his expression grim but calm. "You've seen the documents," he said. "I have." He placed a folder on the table. "The ethics committee will open an investigation. If your brother's company misused funds, we'll have to make a public statement." I nodded. "Do it. I won't interfere." Rivera studied me carefully. "You understand this will implicate your family name?" "It already does," I said. "I'm just refusing to hide it this time." He smiled faintly, a trace of admiration in his eyes. "You are not your brother, Madam Caldwell." "No," I said quietly. "But he'll learn that too." That evening I returned to my apartment in D.C., the one nobody in Savannah had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, everything quiet and deliberate. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the balcony as the city lights flickered on. The skyline was familiar now, not intimidating. Here I wasn't someone's sister. I was simply myself. At 7, the phone rang. "Ethan." I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Clara, his voice was rough, tired. "I need to talk to you. I'm listening. They're saying the foundation's under investigation. That I didn't cover for you." I interrupted. "Correct." He exhaled sharply. "This isn't what it looks like. I didn't steal anything. It was just accounting, moving funds for partnerships. You know how complicated this stuff is." "Ethan," I said softly, "I've been working in international finance for 15 years. I know exactly what it looks like." Silence on the other end. "You think I meant to hurt you?" he said finally. "No," I said. "You just didn't think I mattered enough to be hurt." He sighed. "If this gets out, I'll lose everything." "I know. Can't you fix it? Talk to your people. Make it go away." I let the silence stretch long enough for him to hear what that request really was, another expectation that I'd save him again. "Do you remember what you said at the wedding?" I asked finally. Still too broke. He didn't answer. "I've been cleaning up after this family since I was old enough to sign my own name." "You don't get to ask me for silence anymore." His tone turned desperate. "Clara, please." "We're family." "No," I said, my voice steady. "We're proof that blood isn't always thicker than truth." I hung up before he could reply. That night I sent one final message to Rivera. Ambassador, proceed with full transparency. The public deserves to know the truth even when it's close to home. Then I closed my laptop and leaned back, the city humming below me. By morning the story had broken. Headlines blazed across every major outlet: Caldwell Foundation under federal review. The articles mentioned Ethan's name, repeatedly followed by a single clarifying line. His sister Clara Caldwell serves as senior liaison to the Trade Council, but is not implicated. The distinction was small but vital. My silence had always protected him. This time, it protected me. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my mother. Her voice trembled, a mix of fear and anger. "How could you let this happen?" "I didn't let it," I said. "He did. You could have stopped them. Stopped the truth." Her silence was louder than her words. "Your father would be ashamed." I closed my eyes, a bitter smile forming. Maybe. But at least he'd know one of us finally told the truth. I hung up, then stepped outside into the cold autumn air. The streets buzzed with energy, people rushing, living unaware that someone's family legacy had just collapsed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself to anyone. The evening sky was bruised with streaks of violet and gold. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the water, my heels clicking against the pavement. Every sound felt sharp, deliberate, like punctuation after years of unfinished sentences. As I stood by the reflecting pool, I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who stayed quiet at dinners, who smiled through condescension, who believed dignity meant endurance. That girl had died somewhere between a wedding toast and an ambassador's handshake. Now what remained was a woman who understood that silence could carry truth, but only if you chose when to break it. I took one last look at the water, its surface calm but alive beneath. Somewhere beyond the headlines and the noise, justice had begun to move quietly in my favor. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for letting it. By the time I arrived at the Trade Council headquarters, reporters had already gathered outside. Their cameras flashed like lightning, voices overlapping in a storm of questions. "Ms. Caldwell, do you have a statement about your brother's investigation? Are you cooperating with federal auditors? Did you know about the misuse of funds?" I kept walking. The lobby doors closed behind me, sealing off the noise. Inside, the air was still cold, humming with the tension of what was about to happen. Rivera was waiting near the elevator, his usual calm tinged with gravity. "They're circling like vultures," he said quietly. "We'll need to make a statement today, something official before the speculation spirals." I nodded. "Then let's give them the truth." The press conference was scheduled for noon. For the next 2 hours, I reviewed documents, briefed the communications team, and rehearsed my statement until the words felt like tempered glass, fragile but sharp enough to cut through lies. When the time came, I stepped onto the stage beside Rivera. The conference room was packed: reporters, diplomats, government staff. My reflection glimmered in the camera's lenses, a dozen versions of me frozen in time. Rivera began, his voice smooth and deliberate. "The Trade Council is aware of the investigation concerning the Caldwell Foundation. We want to clarify that Ms. Clara Caldwell has no involvement in its operations." Then he gestured for me to step forward. The murmurs quieted. I gripped the podium not for balance, but to anchor myself to this moment, the intersection between truth and history. "My family's name is under investigation," I began, my voice steady. "And while I share that name, I do not share their actions. The work we do here, the partnerships we build, the progress we create is based on transparency. I will not let personal ties compromise that." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone raised a hand. "Ms. Caldwell, are you saying you were unaware of your brother's misconduct?" "Yes," I said. "And I regret that my silence in the past allowed certain assumptions to go unchallenged. But silence does not equal complicity. Today I am speaking clearly for myself and for every woman who's ever been told to keep the peace instead of telling the truth." Another question: how do you respond to critics who say this is a family betrayal? I looked directly into the camera. Integrity doesn't stop at family lines. When wrongdoing threatens what's right, accountability isn't betrayal, it's justice. The words hung in the air. Rivera watched me with quiet pride. The room buzzed with the energy of shifting perception, the kind that comes when people realize a narrative has changed direction. After the conference ended, I walked out to the terrace overlooking the city. Rivera joined me. "You handled that flawlessly," he said. "It didn't feel flawless," I admitted. "It felt necessary. That's what leadership feels like." He offered a small smile, then added, "You know they'll talk about this for weeks, but eventually they'll talk about your work again. That's how truth endures." I turned to face him. "What happened to Ethan?" "He'll be prosecuted," Rivera said plainly. "The evidence is clear." I nodded. "Then that's the end of it. Or the beginning," he said. "You never really end something like this. You just decide what to carry forward." That evening I returned to my apartment exhausted but lighter, like the city's noise had been turned down a notch. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from colleagues, officials, journalists. I ignored them all until one caught my eye. It was from my mother. It arrived minutes after the press conference feed cut out Mom. I saw the news. "I don't know how to fix this, Clara. Your father would be ashamed, but I won't ask you to lie. Be careful." That was her apology, her final acknowledgement that her attempts to maintain the facade had failed. She was simply out of fight. It was from Ethan. I watched the press conference. "You looked powerful. I guess you always were." "I'm sorry." I read it twice, then put the phone down. Some apologies come too late to matter, but that didn't make them meaningless. They were just echoes, proof that the past still existed even when you'd walked away from it. Later, Rivera called. "I have something for you," he said. "An opportunity." "What kind, Geneva?" "International Economic Forum. They want you to lead the delegation next month. Your work here has caught global attention." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "You're serious? As serious as the ambassador who just called you madam?" I laughed softly, the sound surprising me. "Then I'll accept." "Good," he said. "Pack your best suit. The world's about to learn your name properly." After the call, I poured a glass of red wine and stepped out onto the balcony. Below me, the city pulsed with Life Taxi's lights, the endless rhythm of ambition. I thought about the first time Ethan had called me too broke in front of a crowd, the sting of humiliation I'd carried like a scar. Now, standing here with the skyline beneath me, I realized something profound. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reconstruction, rebuilding yourself so thoroughly that no one who hurt you could recognize what you became. As the night deepened, my reflection in the glass looked calm, certain. The headlines would fade. The scandal would quiet. But the lesson would remain. Power isn't in what people say about you. It's in what you decide to do next. The rain began again, softer this time, almost like applause. I lifted my glass in a quiet toast to the city, to the truth, and to every version of myself that had fought to reach this one moment. "Here's to the reckoning," I whispered, "and to survive it with grace." The invitation arrived embossed in gold, sealed with the insignia of the U.S. Department of State. In recognition of outstanding contributions to international cooperation, you are cordially invited to the Diplomatic Honors Dinner, Washington, D.C. I stared at it for a long time before placing it beside my coffee cup. It wasn't just another gala or networking event. It was the kind of evening where reputations were cemented, where alliances were quietly born over crystal glasses and carefully chosen words. And this time, my name wasn't buried in the footnotes. It was listed in bold. The dinner was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent the next few days buried in preparation for Geneva, coordinating the delegation and finalizing policy drafts. Still, the thought of the event lingered like static in the background. On Thursday evening, I received a call from Rivera. "Clara," he said, his voice unusually warm, "I'll be at the dinner too. The secretary wants to acknowledge our entire East African initiative. I hope you'll sit at my table." "I'd be honored," I said, smiling. "But you know how these things go. They might rearrange the seating for political optics." He chuckled softly. "Not this time. You've earned your seat. That night I tried on the navy gown I hadn't worn since the Nairobi summit. It fit perfectly elegant, understated, powerful. Not the kind of dress meant to impress, but the kind that told people you no longer needed to. Friday came cloaked in winter rain. The city glittered through the drizzle, streetlights glowing like molten gold. The hotel ballroom was alive with movement diplomats, senators, ambassadors, from every corner of the world. I entered just as the orchestra began a quiet overture. Rivera spotted me and rose from his table. "Madam Caldwell," he greeted with a smile. "You clean up diplomacy itself." "Careful," I teased. "You might start sounding poetic." We took our seats near the front. Across the room I noticed familiar faces, some curious, others calculating. The same people who had once dismissed me as the quiet sister of a wealthy man now whispered my name like it belonged to someone important. Halfway through the evening, as waiters poured champagne and the Secretary of State took the stage, I felt a shift in the room's energy. Conversations softened, eyes turned. Tonight, the Secretary announced we recognize individuals who have not only represented our nation with excellence, but have also embodied integrity during moments of personal trial. One such individual is here tonight, Ms. Clara Caldwell. The applause came like a wave. Rivera leaned closer. "Go," he said. I rose, walking toward the stage under the golden light. Each step felt deliberate, heavier with history, but lighter with purpose. The Secretary extended a hand and presented me with a crystal plaque etched with my name. "Your courage to stand for truth," he said, "even when it demanded personal sacrifice, is the kind of example we need in diplomacy." The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed. And somewhere in that crowd I saw them, Ethan and my mother, sitting near the back. For a moment I froze. I hadn't seen either of them since the investigation had begun. Ethan looked smaller, almost fragile under the chandelier's glow. My mother sat upright, her pearls immaculate but her eyes tired. As I stepped down from the stage, Rivera whispered they came to see what strength looks like. After the speeches ended, guests moved between tables, networking over dessert. Rivera was pulled aside by a senator, leaving me momentarily alone. That's when I felt a presence beside me. "Clara," my mother said softly. I turned, meeting her gaze. "You came." "We heard you were being honored," she said, her tone formal, practiced. "We wanted to support you." "Support," I repeated. "That's new." Ethan approached, then his tie slightly askew. His confidence stripped bare. "I wanted to apologize properly," he said quietly. "For everything." I studied him for a long moment. He looked older, thinner, and for the first time genuinely human. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I can't protect you anymore." "I know," he said. "You shouldn't have to." "I was blind, Clara. You did what I never could stand on your own without needing the family name." My mother's eyes shimmered. "Your father would have been proud." I exhaled slowly. "Then maybe it's time we all stop pretending pride comes from appearance. It should come from what we build, not what we inherit." She reached for my hand, hesitant. "Maybe you could visit home again. Start over." I shook my head gently. Home isn't a place I can go back to, but maybe we can build a new one. Before they could answer, the orchestra began again. Rivera rejoined me, glancing between us. "Everything all right?" I smiled faintly. "Just unfinished business, finding its way to closure." He nodded toward the stage. "The ambassador from Kenya wants to speak with you before he leaves. He says the next partnership expansion depends on your insights." Of course, I said, the diplomat returning to my voice. As I crossed the ballroom, the murmurs followed, respectful, curious, different. For years, I'd been the woman no one quite noticed, the one they assumed would fade quietly into the background. Now I was the one they looked to for direction. Later that night, after the final toast, I stood near the exit watching the guests depart. Ethan and my mother approached one last time. "We'll keep in touch," she said softly. "Do," I replied. "Just don't call it charity when you finally listen." Ethan smiled ruefully. "Fair enough." When they left, Rivera appeared beside me, offering his arm. Madam Caldwell, he said, his tone light, but his eyes serious. You handled that with more grace than most politicians could dream of. I'm not a politician, I said, looping my arm through his. Just someone who finally stopped apologizing for surviving. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city shimmered clean and alive, reflections of light dancing across the wet pavement. As we stepped into the night, Rivera said quietly, "You know power reveals people, but grace, it transforms them." I looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds. Maybe that's what tonight was. Transformation. And as the driver opened the car door, I thought not of revenge, not of vindication, but of the peace that comes when truth no longer needs to shout to be heard. 3 days after the diplomatic honors dinner, I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand at 5 in the morning. The number flashing on the screen was foreign, the prefix unmistakably international. I hesitated before answering. "Clara Caldwell," I said, still half asleep. "Good morning, Madam Caldwell," came a familiar voice, smooth and dignified. "This is Ambassador Omandi calling from Nairobi." I sat up instantly, heart quickening. "Your Excellency," I said, clearing my throat. "It's a pleasure to hear from you. I won't keep you long," he continued, "but I wanted to extend a personal invitation. We're assembling a multinational task force for East African infrastructure reform. I told the secretary that the project will proceed only if you agree to lead the American delegation." For a moment, all I could hear was the quiet hum of the city outside my window. "I'm honored," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Truly honored." "This isn't just a formality," he said. "You've proven that integrity and intellect can coexist, a rare combination in diplomacy. The project begins in Nairobi next month. Consider it a homecoming of sorts." I smiled at that word. Homecoming. When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the skyline bathed in early light. After years of being dismissed, of being told I was too quiet, too soft, or too simple, I had been chosen to lead a global initiative. The irony was almost poetic. By 7, I was already at the office. Rivera arrived shortly after, coffee in hand, his eyes bright with purpose. "I heard the news," he said. "So it's true you're leading the delegation?" I nodded. "Omandi himself called. He said it's conditional on my participation." Rivera grinned. "That's not a condition, that's a coronation." The following days blurred into a whirlwind of planning. Meetings with trade officials, calls with foreign ministries, late nights drafting proposals that would later shape the entire initiative. My calendar looked like a chessboard, every square a move toward something greater than I'd ever imagined. In quieter moments, though, I thought about my family, about Ethan. The news of the investigation had already begun to fade from headlines, replaced by newer scandals. His company was gone, his foundation dissolved. Word spread that he'd started consulting independently small-scale projects, nothing glamorous. I wondered if humility had finally found him. That question was answered a week later when my assistant buzzed my office. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." I looked up from my notes. "Who is it?" "He says he's your brother." The words hit like a sudden gust of cold air. "Send him in." Ethan entered quietly, wearing a plain gray suit that hung a little loose on him. His posture was different, less arrogant, more grounded. He stood by the door for a moment before speaking. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd try," I replied. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Fair. I read about Nairobi. Congratulations." "Thank you." He hesitated. "I came because I need to say something before you leave." I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Go on." He sat exhaling. "I thought I understood success," he said quietly. "Money appearances being the loudest voice in the room." But I was wrong. He stopped, swallowing hard. "You showed me what real success looks like. It's not power. It's dignity." For the first time in years, his words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded human. "I've been working with a nonprofit," he continued. "Small-scale agricultural grants in Georgia. It's nothing compared to what you do, but it's honest. And for once, I feel like I'm actually helping people." I leaned back, studying him. That sounds good, Ethan. He nodded. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm proud of you. Even when I didn't understand you. I felt something loosen in my chest, years of anger, disappointment, misunderstanding. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. He stood, slipping his hands into his pockets. Mom wanted me to ask if you'll be back for Christmas. I smiled faintly. Tell her I'll try. But no promises. He chuckled. You always hated promises. Only the empty ones. He hesitated at the door. Clara, one more thing. The day at my wedding when I said what I said, I remember. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. I wish I'd understood then what I do now, that I was standing next to the most capable person in that room. The ambassador knew it before I did. The silence that followed wasn't cold or sharp. It was full of understanding, heavy with forgiveness. Neither of us had been brave enough to ask for until now. Goodbye, Ethan, I said finally. Goodbye, Madam Caldwell, he said with a faint, almost playful bow. When he left, I stared at the closed door for a long time, realizing how far we'd both come. Some wounds don't heal with time. They heal when truth finally replaces pride. That evening, Rivera called again. Your travel itinerary is ready, he said, and the secretary wants to host a press briefing tomorrow to announce your appointment officially. I laughed softly. More cameras. Afraid so, he said. But this time, they'll be saying your name with respect. The next morning, as I stood behind the podium at the briefing, the flashbulbs began again, just like the day of the scandal. But this time, the questions were different. Ms. Caldwell, how does it feel to represent your country on such a historic project? What inspired your leadership approach? I smiled. It feels like coming full circle. Once I was underestimated because I didn't speak loudly enough. Now I realize the world listens best when you speak with conviction instead of volume. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was steady, deliberate. Later that night, as I walked home under the city lights, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Still too broke, I stopped walking, startled until I saw the second line. Just kidding. I'm proud of you, sis. E. I laughed, standing on the quiet sidewalk, the sound echoing softly between the buildings. For the first time in a long time, broke didn't mean failure. It meant the breaking of something old, the silence, the shame, the need for validation. And in its place, something stronger had taken root. The truth, the grace, and the unshakable certainty that I had finally become the woman I was always meant to be. The air smelled different the moment I stepped off the plane, earthy, electric, alive. Nairobi's warmth pressed against me like a memory I'd almost forgotten. It wasn't my first time here, but this trip carried a different weight. I wasn't just an interpreter anymore. I wasn't the quiet woman behind someone else's success. I was here as the head of the U.S. delegation. As we drove from the airport to the hotel, I watched the city unfurl, glass towers beside red clay roads, street vendors shouting prices over the hum of traffic, jacaranda trees bursting violet in the sun. The contradictions of Kenya had always fascinated me, beauty and chaos, tradition and ambition intertwined. Ambassador Omondi met me at the entrance of the Kempinski. Madam Caldwell, he said warmly, his English rich with musical cadence. Welcome home. Thank you, Your Excellency, I replied. It's an honor to be back. He laughed softly. Honor is mutual. The delegation's waiting for you tomorrow morning. Tonight we rest. Yes, I smiled. Rest sounds diplomatic. He chuckled, clasping my hand briefly. Tomorrow we will build the future. That night from the hotel balcony, I looked out over the city lights. They reminded me of Washington in a way, but softer, more forgiving. Down below, children were still playing soccer in an empty lot, their laughter carrying through the humid air. And I thought about how far I'd come from being the sister no one respected to the woman who now held a seat at one of the most powerful tables in the world. The next morning, the first session began at sunrise. Delegates from 6 nations filled the conference hall. Flags lined the stage, microphones gleamed, and for once I didn't feel out of place in that sea of formality. Rivera joined me at the front, reviewing notes. How's the jet lag? He asked. Managed, I said. Truthfully, I've waited too long for this to let sleep stand in the way. He smiled. You sound like a diplomat already. I learned from the best. At precisely 8, Omandi stood to open the session. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here not as competitors, but as partners, he said. And it is my pleasure to introduce a woman whose insight made this project possible, Ms. Clara Caldwell. Applause rippled through the room. I walked to the podium, heart-steady voice clear. Your Excellencies, I began our goal today isn't to impose ideas, but to listen to learn from the people who live the realities we hope to improve. Economic cooperation means nothing without cultural understanding. Development without respect is just another form of control. Heads nodded around the table. Rivera caught my eye, pride flickering in his expression. For the next 6 hours, we negotiated frameworks, investment structures, and accountability clauses. Every detail mattered. Every sentence carried history. I spoke in measured tones, switching between English, Swahili, and French when needed. It wasn't about showing off, it was about connection. During a break, Omandi approached. You remind me of my daughter, he said softly. She's studying economics. She believes women like you make the impossible possible. I smiled. Then she's already wiser than most. That evening, a formal dinner was hosted at the embassy. I wore a simple ivory gown, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. It was the opposite of the navy dress I'd worn that night in Savannah, and yet it carried all the same power this time, unburdened by shame. Humility, I realized, was now my signature, mistaken for weakness no longer. The same humility that had once been mistaken for weakness now carried its own quiet authority. As we dined under lanterns strung across the courtyard, Rivera raised his glass. To the woman who taught us that silence isn't submission, it's strategy. The guests laughed softly, clinking glasses. Later, as music played and conversations flowed, I stepped aside to take in the moment. That's when I noticed a familiar face among the guests, a tall man in a dark suit watching me with recognition. It took a second to place him. Michael, I said, surprised. My former brother-in-law, the one who'd married Vanessa, the woman who'd uninvited me from her gala years ago. Clara, he said, his smile cautious. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. I'm with one of the American infrastructure firms, he explained. We're bidding on the transport initiative. I nodded slowly. So you finally came to Kenya after all. His smile faltered. We've heard your name everywhere. You're the one everyone listens to. Imagine that, I said evenly. The quiet sister turned diplomat. He looked uncomfortable. Vanessa sends her regards. I'm sure she does. She regrets how things ended, he added quickly. We both do. Regret is a fine thing, I said, lifting my glass. But redemption's better earned through action. He hesitated. Is there any chance of working together again? Professionally, I mean. I looked at him for a long moment, then smiled politely. Michael, I believe in second chances. But I also believe in remembering who showed up when no one else did. He nodded, understanding the unspoken refusal. You've changed. No, I said softly. I just stopped pretending I wasn't already capable. As he walked away, Rivera appeared beside me. Old ghosts, more like old lessons, I said. The music shifted slow and warm, and the ambassador called Rivera to join a group of officials. I stayed under the lanterns, watching the city beyond the embassy walls, the heartbeat of a place that had once underestimated me now waiting for my direction. When the night ended, I returned to my suite and opened the balcony doors. The air was thick with jasmine. I thought about the girl who had once been called too broke, too simple, too quiet. I thought about the wedding where humiliation had burned like acid, and about the moment the ambassador had looked at me and said, Madam. And then I realized this was what true revenge looked like. Not rage, not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes when you've turned every insult into momentum, every wound into wisdom. Down below, I could hear the sounds of Nairobi still alive long after midnight. The city didn't sleep, and neither did ambition. I whispered into the warm air, half a prayer, half a promise. This time, the story ends on my terms. The second week in Nairobi began like any other meetings panels and endless drafts of policy language that would soon be studied by ministers and investors. But something shifted that morning. A report landed on my desk detailing the shortlisted companies for the infrastructure contracts. At the top of the list, Chin Global Partners. I stared at the name for a long time. Michael's firm. The same man who'd once smirked at my translation job. The same one who'd helped my brother mock me at that wedding. I almost laughed at the irony. The tables had turned so completely that I now had the power to decide whether his company would be part of the largest economic project in East Africa. By noon, Rivera stopped by my office at the embassy. "You've seen the proposals I have," I said evenly. "Chin Global is among them." He raised an eyebrow. "A conflict of interest?" "No," I said, closing the folder. "Just history." Rivera studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "History can be instructive, but don't let it become emotional." "It won't," I said. "They'll be judged by merit." Still, as I reviewed their documents later that night, I couldn't ignore the shortcuts in their proposal. The overpromising, the cultural insensitivity in their phrasing, the same Western arrogance that had once dismissed every voice that didn't sound like theirs. Their numbers were polished, but their understanding was shallow. The next day, during the review session, representatives from each firm presented their case before the delegation panel. When Chin Global's turn came, Michael walked in wearing his usual confidence like a tailored suit. Behind him, Vanessa followed elegantly dressed, her smile rehearsed. She froze slightly when she saw me sitting at the head of the table. I met her gaze, calm and professional, offering a polite nod. "Madam Caldwell." Michael began smoothly on behalf of Chin Global Partners. "We're honored to present our proposal for the Nairobi Transit Renewal Project." He clicked through his slides, speaking in buzzwords: efficiency, modernization, profitability. I listened silently, my face unreadable. When he finished, Rivera gestured for me to ask questions. "Thank you, Mr. Chin," I said. "Your presentation was clear. However, I have a few concerns." He smiled a little too confidently. "Of course, your cost projections rely on imported materials rather than local sourcing. That undermines one of our core requirements, community inclusion. And your sustainability section lacks any mention of regional environmental regulations. Were these oversights?" Michael hesitated, glancing at Vanessa. "Our consultants assured us," I interrupted, my voice calm but cutting. "Your consultants are not familiar with Kenyan law. I know because I helped write the memorandum they're required to follow." A few delegates murmured. Vanessa's face was drained of color. Michael cleared his throat. "We can make adjustments." "Adjustments," I repeated. "Don't fix a fundamental misunderstanding of culture. This isn't just about infrastructure, Mr. Chin. It's about respect." The silence stretched. Rivera looked amused but said nothing. After the presentations ended, the delegation reconvened privately. Rivera leaned toward me. "So, they're not ready," I said simply. "They don't listen. They assume authority replaces awareness." He nodded. "Then you know what to do." That evening, the final decision was announced. Chin Global did not make the shortlist. I expected anger. Instead, what came was a knock on my hotel door a few hours later. Vanessa stood there, rain-soaked and trembling. Her perfect hair was coming undone, her voice shaky. "I know you hate me," she said. "But please, Michael's devastated. This contract was everything to him." I looked at her quietly. "And when you uninvited me from your gala because I wasn't sophisticated enough, did you think about what that meant to me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't understand then. I do now. You have every right to hate me." "I don't hate you," I said softly. "But I stopped needing your approval years ago." She swallowed hard. "Please, Clara. He's trying to change. We both are." "Then prove it," I said. "Work with local partners. Learn their customs. Build something real. I won't hand you redemption. You have to earn it." She nodded, defeated but sincere. "You sound like the ambassador," she whispered. "Maybe I finally became one," I said, and closed the door. The next morning, Rivera called an informal gathering for the final signing ceremony. The partnership had been awarded to a consortium that included several local entrepreneurs, small firms that had previously been ignored by Western investors. As the documents were signed, the room filled with quiet celebration. Clara Rivera said as the applause faded, "You've done something rare. You turned a policy into justice." I smiled. Maybe justice just needed a translator. Later during the closing reception, I stepped outside to the embassy terrace. The evening air was warm, the city glowing gold beneath the setting sun. Michael was standing by the fountain alone. When he saw me, he walked over slowly. "You were right," he said quietly. "About everything." I didn't respond. "I used to think success was about being seen," he continued. "But watching you today, it's about being remembered for doing something that matters. That's the difference between ambition and purpose," I said. He nodded. "I hope I can still find that." "You can," I said, "but only if you stop trying to win and start trying to understand." He extended a hand. I shook it. It wasn't reconciliation. It was closed. That night, as I packed my suitcase for the flight back to Washington, I paused for a moment by the window. The city hummed softly below me, alive and hopeful. Years ago, my brother had called me too broke. Vanessa had called me too simple. Michael had called me invisible. Now they called me Madam. And not because of the title, but because I had finally earned their respect, the kind that couldn't be taken away, only recognized. As the lights of Nairobi flickered against the horizon, I whispered to myself, the tables turned, and this time, they'll stay that way. The plane touched down at Dulles just past midnight, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. I sat by the window watching the city unfold beneath me, my city now, the place where I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece. The applause from Nairobi still echoed faintly in my mind, the weight of the moment still heavy on my chest. I'd done what I came to do. The tables had turned, and I had walked away not just victorious, but whole. The car waiting outside the terminal was from the State Department. My driver, James, greeted me with his usual warm professionalism. "Welcome back, Madam Caldwell," he said, placing my luggage carefully in the trunk. It still felt strange sometimes, that title, Madam. Once it had been an accident, a slip of respect from someone who didn't know my history. Now it was deliberate, earned. We drove through the sleeping city. The streets were slick from a late-night rain, the lights reflecting off the asphalt like molten glass. When we passed the Jefferson Memorial, I caught my reflection in the window, tired eyes, faint smile, quiet power. The kind that didn't need to be loud anymore. At home, I set my suitcase by the door and walked straight to the balcony. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of spring. Below, the Potomac shimmered under the moonlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, messages from colleagues, congratulations from ambassadors, and one from Rivera. "You changed more than policy, Clara. You changed perception. Sleep well, Madam." I smiled, typing a short reply. "Thank you, my friend. Onward." The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds and the soft hum of the city already alive. Coffee brewing, radio murmuring about the Caldwell Doctrine, a phrase I hadn't coined but that had somehow attached itself to my work. I turned the volume down and laughed softly. People always needed to name things to turn stories into symbols. But this story wasn't about doctrine or diplomacy. It was about dignity, about reclaiming a name that once felt like a burden. At 9, my assistant Julia called. "Madam Caldwell, there's a delivery here for you. No return address." "Send it up," I said. Minutes later, the concierge brought a white box tied with silver ribbon. Inside was a single magnolia branch, still fresh, and a small handwritten note. "You were right. We're learning. Thank you for showing us how. V&M, Vanessa and Michael." I traced the neat handwriting with my thumb and set the note aside. Forgiveness didn't always arrive with words. Sometimes it came quietly in gestures that spoke of understanding more than apology. By noon, I was already back at work. The Geneva summit was approaching fast, and the Trade Council wanted me to lead the U.S. briefing. My calendar was filled with meetings, but my mind was strangely clear. I had learned something on that trip to Nairobi. Power isn't the opposite of humility. True power is the ability to stay kind, even when the world hasn't been kind to you. Late that afternoon, Rivera stopped by my office. "You look different," he said, leaning against the doorway. "Exhausted," I teased. He smiled. "Fulfilled. It suits you." He handed me a folder. Final sign-offs from Nairobi. And a personal letter from the ambassador. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of embossed paper with Omandi's elegant handwriting. To Madam Caldwell, leadership is not declared. It's revealed. You didn't just translate language, you translated humanity. Kenya remembers. My throat tightened. "He's too kind," I murmured. Rivera shook his head. "No, just accurate." That evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind in the quiet of my office. I walked to the window overlooking the Capitol lights flickering in the distance and thought about everything that had led me here, every insult I'd swallowed, every silence I'd turned into strength. Some people spend their lives chasing recognition. I had spent mine earning it without realizing I already possessed something rarer, respect that wasn't given but grown. My phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. "Mom wants to host Thanksgiving at the old house. She said you should bring a guest this time." I smiled. It was more than an invitation, it was peace. "Tell her I'll be there," I replied, "and I'll bring dessert." For a long time after, I just stood there listening to the city's heartbeat through the glass. It wasn't loud, just steady like mine. When I finally turned off the lights, I paused by my desk. I walked back toward the bedroom, and my gaze fell on the simple garment bag hanging on the closet door. Inside was the navy gown, the one that had started everything. It was no longer a symbol of my frugality or my embarrassment. It was a museum piece, a quiet testament to the resilience it took to stand firm. It was the color of quiet dignity, and it had been the catalyst for the greatest public performance of my life. The navy dress, the silence, and the title. They were one story now. A story that said I no longer needed to apologize for my smallness, because I had quietly grown into something monumental. Before heading home, I dictated one final note to Julia for the next day's newsletter. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being calm in the chaos, the silence that steadies the truth that endures. Signed, CC. And then I walked out, coat over my arm, head high, ready to meet whatever came next. Because the storm had passed. The noise had faded. And in the quiet that followed, I had finally found myself not the woman my brother mocked, not the one society underestimated, but the one the world now called Madam. And this time, the name felt exactly right.